Hey guys, I'm Lee Williamson and I work at Elemental Concept. Now, every Thursday I'll be teaching the designers in the department how to animate. This week I've decided to teach him how to set up assets inside Illustrator and ready them for After Effects, how to animate generally in After Effects and set up a neat library, and how to export out. I hope you enjoy our first video. Right, the first thing to do would be to separate these into layers and get it ready for After Effects. So I can go cut, paste a new layer, paste in place, call that W, cut, new layer, paste in place, L. Very good to label your layers. Cut, paste in place, circle, cut that, paste in place, Lee Williamson, and last of all at the very bottom, this is your background layer. Now it's worth to mention, even if you don't need a background layer, I would recommend you create a layer that covers your whole entire artboard, because if you ever make edits to this animation, maybe the size of the circle or the W, and you resave it, it throws it out in After Effects. So be sure to always have one square that covers the whole canvas, and that way whenever you make any edits to small items on the stage, it will not throw its positional point. Good tip to know. Now to import, I'm just going to click on this library, or I can actually drag the file from here onto my project library. So I will take that document and drag it inside there, and we'll go composition, and I go OK. And it's created a composition, basically it's a video clip with all your assets in, and inside this there's also an assets folder full of all the layers that you created. So if I double click on this, now we have the assets exactly the way they were in Illustrator. If I go to my composition settings, I've got it set to 1 hour at the moment. Usually it's best to always set your composition to longer than the animation that you're going to be animating. It just makes life a lot easier later down the line, because if you're, let's show you an example. Let's just say this was this small. Now if I go back there again, just put that to 1 minute, and I zoom out, you've got the whole entire layer which you have to drag back again to the full time. So it's always good to set that up in advance to make your life a lot easier. Now the next thing to do is to get your layers set up. For me, if I've got a lot of layers, I like to give them different colors. So maybe the W and the L could be red. Maybe I want to give this document inside here a color. We can also give it red. You've also noticed there's this little crosshair on the asset. That's its orientation point. So for example, if the W was going to rotate off something, it would rotate off that. If you want to change that, you press Y on your keyboard, and so now you want it to rotate off there. I press R on the keyboard and I can rotate it from the orientation point. The next thing you will need to know is we've got text over here. If you wanted to make that text active, currently it's you can't break it apart. Even if you tried and you go create, it goes could not create outlines. So the cool trick around this, you can go into Illustrator, double click, Apple C, so that copies it, layer new text, and now you have a fully working version of that copy you made. It remembers your leading, your kerning, your colors, you name it, which is fantastic. If you want to make sure it's exactly in the right place, you can go into your modes here, just like in Photoshop. If you click on this and say difference, and I rotate it, I move it to that position, when it starts to turn fully black, it's in the exact position it should be. So quite a useful tip there, and we can just turn it back to normal. Great. Now each layer has its own positional scale, rotation values, anything you want to do it. If you drop this down, you got anchor point, which is a thing that I edited. I showed you how to edit over there. You got position. If you click on position, the little stopwatch over there, scroll a little bit further down and move that from point A to point B. Now it's remembered your position values. It's animating it. Scale, same thing. You can scale it up and down. Rotation, rotate it, and opacity makes it fade up and down. I'm just going to Apple Z that out. Start from the beginning. Now, if you did lock down a keyframe, you can press U on the keyboard and it remembers anything that's been animated, only the values that have been animated. So currently I've only done position, and therefore you only get position. If you want to animate your object, you can also say separate dimensions, and if you only want to do X is from left to right, Y is from up to down. This is say X, for example. You say plus on your keyboards, you can zoom in, lock down a keyframe, move from left to right. Now this is currently animating linearly. If you notice these dots in between, it's showing you that it's going at a consistent speed. That's a linear keyframe. If you highlight these and you press F9 on your keyboard, you get easy ease. So if I press plus on my keyboard and I zoom into this, it's going slowly, then goes fast, and then slows down again. Now, if you want this to look really cool, you need to emulate real life. Now, in real life, if someone, for example, wants to jump, they would bend down, draw energy, and jump up into the air, and when they'd land, they'd crouch again before they stand up. We can do the same thing with this copy. We can make the W pull back, then make the W shoot forward, and then back to position. So it's going to go back, forward, and to position. Now usually when this pulls back, now this is called anticipation. Anticipation is usually a lot slower. It's almost like you're drawing the energy, kind of like a coil in a spring. So this value would usually be animated on for a lot longer, and then the actual animation from point A to point B would be really fast, and then the follow through, the little extra bounce before it lands, would be roughly somewhere down the middle between those. So now you'd get this, pull back, shoot forward, and fantastic. You can make this look a lot smoother with easy ease. As I said again, F9 on your keyboard. If you go into your graph editor, you can see the way it's been animated. Now if you want this to be a little bit slower, just to explain a graph editor, when you see this curve, when it's horizontal, it means it's not moving at all. When it's vertical, it's literally going full speed. So let's give you an example. If I pull this over here, that's going to take slower to pull back. If I pull on this handle over here and here, this is going to make this curve tighter, which means it's going to shoot forward faster, but it's going to be slower on these little points here. So let's show you. Boom. Cool. Now, if you wanted this to be a little bit more cartoony, you could add something called oscillation. Now, oscillation is kind of like when something goes from point A to point B, and it kind of swings a little bit before it slows down. Yeah, in cartoons you get more of a rubbery bounce. So if I'd hold down Control on the keyboard, add another keyframe. Now watch what happens. And I can add more of that if I wanted. I can Control on the keyboard and add another one. As you notice, this value is degrading until it gets to the end. So now watch what happens. So it really look nice. They're not quite smooth. So another trick I'll show you is that when something oscillates and that gets weaker as it eventually stops, that value is going to half. So half of that value, and we'd put it about there. So that's much better. Now I'm going to show you another thing. When you want to edit the circle, I made that with an outline in an Illustrator, and you can't do much other than change its scale or move its position from left to right or its transparency. But if you want to do more with it, you right click it and you go to create shape from layers, and it breaks it apart. Now the unfortunate thing is when you break things apart in Illustrator, especially if it's got a gradient on it, it turns grey. Now it's also duplicated another circle below it. So if I just take that circle below it, so you can see the original one that I broke apart, we can rectify this. So we click on the one that's been created to paths, and we can go into our FX palette here and look for something called ramp. You drag ramp on top of there, and it shows two color values from black to white. So we are going to change these to the two different pinks that we have here. So let's use that dark pink and then that lighter warm pink. And there are two little crosshairs over here, and that's where those values can start and end. So you can move this around until you're happy with what you have there. And then we can delete this, and now let's show you the magic that you can do with it. So if we drop this down, there's a button called add. You click on it and you get trim paths, and that gets you a start and an end point. So if I pull this value down to 0, circle is gone. I drop a keyframe, put that back to 100. It animates on, and if you want to animate off, you can put that value to 100. And it animates on and off. Great. Now the other thing to show is a pick whip tool. This is when you want an object to have the same properties of the object that has the animation on it. Almost think about it in Photoshop. A parent tool is like sticking a layer into a folder, and everything you do to the folder happens to the layers. So if I wanted the L to go with the W and I didn't want to animate the L too, I can use this little tool here, and if I drag it to the W, it parents it to it and even tells you my parent is the W. Now look what happens. The L and the W move together. Very useful. The other trick to show you is you can create extra assets straight inside of After Effects. So if you say File, New, Solid, you can put a solid color on your layer. And if you see this little box over here, you can choose that to Circle, and you can create a circle with that, which is cool. Bear in mind when you do this, it adds a folder called Solids, so that little solid layer is inside there. Then there's also something called an adjustment layer. So if you go File, let's click off that, New, Adjustment Layer. Now this effects palette over here has amazing things in it. So if you wanted to say now adjust the curves like you would do in Photoshop, you can drag your curves on that adjustment layer, and you can adjust the curves and the lighting. Now there are tons of other awesome things inside your effects and presets palette. I would recommend you just stream through them and test them out. Drag them onto your adjustment layer, and what the adjustment layer does is it affects everything that's underneath it. Cool. And an adjustment layer also goes into your solids palette. Now, what else have I not shown you? It's also good to have a very neat library. So I've got a solids folder. We can create a new folder and we can call this, let's call this pre-comps. So I'll drag this inside there. And let's make an assets folder. Assets. And drag my assets inside here. So all the imports were in there, the pre-comps in there, the solids are in there. Just a lot neater kind of a structure to go with. Also, now that you know roughly how to import inside After Effects and set up your Illustrator files and how to animate a bit, the next step would be to show you how to render out a quick video. So if you create a new folder and you call it renders, you go file, export, add to media encoder. Now I already have media encoder opened up, and you're going to notice that file has been added to media encoder. Just to start off very simply, if you can't get your head around things, I just recommend going to H.264 and choosing a format like YouTube or Vimeo. So you can go through there and go, I want YouTube 1080 full HD, and say OK, and then choose where you want this to save to. I set up that renders folder file and just press that little play button and it renders out for you. Now the other thing, if you sometimes have layers that you can't find, a really cool thing is the search bars. You have one inside your library and one on your layers palette. If I was looking, for example, for Lee Williamson there, and I had a really messy library, I could just type in Lee Williamson, and now everything that says Lee Williamson would pop out in that search bar. Very useful to find. Also, another one would be useful to show you is how the search bar works on the layers palette. So if I had animated scale and I wanted to find everything that I said animated my scale on, this will open up every scale value on every single layer. Very useful. So when you press this squiggly key called the tilde key, when you're clicking on your layers, you can see all your layers. Now, if you've got a lot of layers when you're working animation and you need extra space revenue, you can press that button and it'll expand up. If you want to just see your video, you can click on the video and press your tilde key and you can see just the video if you didn't want to see the layers. All right, so we'll catch up next week with more questions. Thank you for watching.